All right, microphone check 1 2. What is this? It's B Michael here with Shifting Paradigms Business, and we are live on KUAW Knowledge, Understanding, and Wisdom Radio, brought to you by the Black Family Technology Awareness Association at the W.E.B. Du Bois Learning Center. That's right. That's right. We got Baba G here in the soundboard, on the soundboard, always holding it up and keeping it down, doing an excellent job with this public podcast, this internet radio that we're doing for the people, for the listeners. That's right. I'm B Michael here. It's been a while. It's been a couple of weeks, man. I've been having some time management conflicts at work, and it happens. It happens. But I've missed my listeners. I've missed this opportunity to share what the Most High has put on my heart. Had a studio guest, but unfortunately we weren't able to connect. And so there's some things that, I have in my pocket for plan B. So that's always ready. But, shifting paradigms, what we're about in our second year, we're all about stimulating critical thought in order to realistically redefine our narrative and positively reshape our reality through dialogue with some Kuji Chagalia, some good self-determination. That's right. So we're here today. We're going to be talking about revelation paradigmatics. This is going to be the third chapter. I've gone over the first two chapters in some previous podcasts with shifting paradigms, but we're going to pick up on the third chapter. But before we do that, just to let us know that we're in the days of revelation, and we've been in the days of revelation really since the turning of this second millennium, going back 2 millenniums ago, really. But we're just seeing prophecy accelerate. We're seeing history demonstrate that the sovereign will of the Most High is true, it's real. Things that were written millennia ago are coming to pass. And the wise, those who are wise and instructed in wisdom, are getting their marching orders. They're knowing what they're supposed to do. Well, I would say what we are supposed to do in order to respond to these times of crisis. And this is what those who are adversarial to life are all orchestrating. They're orchestrating this. There weren't just pandemics. They were plandemics. There aren't food shortages that are supposed to just come. They're planned. These things are orchestrated. This is science, people. This is political, social, economic science at work at its worst. This is diabolical. This is diabolical what's taking place. Let's know this for sure. I want to just go over a few headlines. Some headlines, of course. Emmanuel Macron, who is the French president, just days after his election victory, announces a digital identity app for citizens to access both public and private services. So you're cataloging the sheep. You're putting these trackers, these markings on these people. And let me say, it's not the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast has been at work and been on people for well over 2 millennia. But what they're doing is they're systematizing this in a very, very orchestrated, totalitarian way. So they have tracks on everybody. They want to know what everybody's doing, how you spend your money, what medications you on, what your sleep patterns are, so on and so forth. Smart homes, all this stuff is feeding the beast computer. And that's what they call this computer where all this stuff is stored, is the beast computer. Very interesting. We also have in Russia, they're openly discussing nuking London, Berlin, and Paris. Of course, this is in response to what they're doing in Ukraine. And I had talked about this with my fellowship group. Ukraine is brought to the attention of the world for a very particular reason. And we just have to know what those reasons are. And if you understand the history of Ukraine, you will understand the history particularly of a particular religious group. Okay, and that religious group has also a very a secular side to it as well, who actually were very complicit with the quote unquote genocide of their own people. And this is, of course, going back to World War II. And the history there is just, you got to read it for yourself. It's very, very clear what is taking place. In fact, Revelation, we're not going to read it in this chapter. Actually, we are going to read in this chapter. It talks about those who say they are, in the Hebrew, the word is Yahudim, or Jews, but are not Jews. but are of the synagogue of Satan, it says. So very interesting. But that Ukrainian region has a very interesting history of what we know today as Judaism and its development and what we know as modern contemporary Judaism, because there is a King Bulan that is attributed with the conversion of the people of that region into Judaism as a result of them not wanting to get involved with the crusade conflict between the Catholics, the Christians, and the Muslims. And so what he did was bring some rabbis from the Babylonian diaspora. This is history. You can look this up on Jewish Encyclopedia. You can look this up on any encyclopedia. His name is Kagan Bulan. This is like the 8th, 9th century, and he converted his people to Judaism. And they just took it to another level for themselves in a political expedient way, much like Constantine did with the faith of the scriptures, much like Constantine did in using Christendom to propel his imperial pursuits. Okay, very interesting. So that Russian conflict with Ukraine is very interesting because it's just really bringing our attention to this matter. So we're dealing with New York. New Yorkers are saying they don't feel safe at home anymore, right? There's some things going on in New York that is making people very uncomfortable. The residents are saying they're overwhelmed with fear and anxiety as they're trying to bring crime to a halt. But crime is the result of capitalist machinations. What you're dealing with in capitalism is exploitation. You're dealing with marginalization. You're dealing with privatization, right? And what that does is it exploits classes of people, and it leaves a big gap of poverty present. And when poverty is present, there's desperation. When desperation is present, there's desperate measures that people take to respond to that. So this is very systematic and very scientifically orchestrated. You think of Skinner's rats in the psychology, the world of psychology. You had Skinner's rats, and they just put a bunch of rats in some laboratory projects, interesting word that they use, projects, right? And they just let the rats just pretty much cannibalize themselves. So it's very interesting how this takes place. And you can read the Kerner report as well under, I want to say, the Lyndon Johnson administration that talks about these types of things as relates to communities where people are marginalized, where people's resources are limited. There's food deserts, right? There's housing crises and housing challenges that people are facing, and poverty. There's high unemployment rates. And then they flood the community with drugs, because guaranteed, like, the drugs that are brought to our community do not find themselves just, developed and grown in the communities. Now, cannabis is one thing, but when you're dealing with like angel dust, and you're dealing with heroin, and you're dealing with even crack cocaine, none of those are indigenous to the areas in which they are found. They're imported, just like the guns. Those guns are imported. It's just the people have to know what the trap is. That's why they call it the trap, right? So New York residents are overwhelmed by the crime that's taking place. And you can see this pretty much in all major cities, including Kansas City. So hundreds of CDC employers never got their COVID-19 jab. An article that comes to us straight out of the 21st Century Wire, but it's a report from Epic Times, is saying that many CDC employees, a matter of fact, a total of 382 workers, are unvaccinated at the CDC, where they were pushing this particular agenda. Notice the word I use, agenda. So a total of 382 workers at the CDC are unvaccinated. Roger Andoff, a Freedom of Information Act officer at the agency, told the Epic Times. Another 9 employees have just had 1 dose of the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines, meaning they also don't qualify as fully vaccinated per the CDC guidelines. 382 employees at the CDC unvaxxed. Very interesting. But there's also intense lockdowns and censorships that are coming. The Chinese government is very intent on censorship and lockdowns because they're saying that there's been a spike in COVID. Very interesting. Very interesting. They're saying that the U.S. economy, another article, another headline, U.S. economy is heading towards an economic crash. And it's into a recession. It's heading to a recession. So the corona crisis hit unexpectedly, but the economic damage from lockdowns was predictable. Economic predictions are commentary here have for years faithfully pointed out the fatal flaw set up by the Federal Reserve since the Great Recession. Accuracy is why numerous readers have offered and maintained their financial support to this particular article here. But Goldman Sachs was regarded as becoming the most bearish bank out by their forecast, rather daintily now, but they have about a 35% chance of eventually seeing a recession in about a year. Of course, 2024 holds in store this eclipse that is going to cause an X to mark this country from the 17 eclipse that took place and when it went over Oregon. But now the X that is coming, because it went from west to east, and now it's going from east to west, starting in Mexico and ending in Canada, and it's going to leave an X over Cairo, Illinois. And this is just letting us know that there are some very ominous times that are approaching for the United States of America. Very ominous. Food supply protectionism is rapidly spreading as global organizations like the IMF warn of consequences, planned consequences. Okay. So all this stuff here is just taking place. They're saying in 6 months that there's going to be food shortages. The globalists are telling the U.S. what happens next. So in the mid-2007, the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS, released a statement predicting the impending Great Depression caused by a credit market implosion. The same year, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, also published warnings of subprime woes leading to the wider economic strife. This was 16 years ago, so many people reading this